Hello, today I'm going to talk politics. I know there are three things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company: politics, religion, and money, but I like to talk about all three. This video doesn't have any political viewpoint, just sharing some information. First off, most political systems are now democratic, with a left-wing liberal side and a right-wing conservative side. In some cases, there are only two real options, like the Democrats and Republicans in the US, whereas in other cases there can be dozens of political parties along the political spectrum from communism to fascism. The problem, as I see it, is that everyone is so concerned with political parties and the views associated with them that the leaders being elected are basically an afterthought. This is a simple comparison of liberal versus conservative views. How many people out there agree wholeheartedly, 100%, with every viewpoint of their respective political allegiance? Some leaders and voters don't want anyone in their party who have conflicting views on any of the issues. For example, Justin Trudeau, Liberal leader running for Prime Minister of Canada, said anyone who is anti-abortion cannot run as a Liberal. But we are all different. We all have our own brains to formulate views and opinions, so how can anyone be expected to think exactly like everyone else on all issues? Just look at these points. Most of them are conflicting. Almost every economy has free market capitalist features, even China, combined with some government-regulated services. Yet, just as with religion, even though people may share the same beliefs, sometimes they find the slightest differences intolerable. As a couple example viewpoints, liberals think abortions are fine, but sentencing someone who has been convicted of a horrible crime to death is not. While conservatives believe in a free market society with minimal government intervention, yet they want high government involvement and spending on military, as well as high government control over immigration. Anyone's political viewpoints are their own, and I have no issues with that. The problem is when the political party trumps the individual. Let's look at some examples. Right now in Greece, Alexis Tsipras's extreme left government was elected as an anti-Euro, anti-austerity choice. Yet after seeing the alternative, they are in the process of imposing the harshest austerity to date for the country in order to keep their banking system stable and to remain in the Euro. So now Athens riots in the streets. But what did you expect was going to happen? This party was magically going to be able to fix all of the country's economic problems because they have a slightly different political view than the previous government? Similar austerity battles are currently occurring in Ontario between the Liberal government and the civil servants who fought to have them elected. Later in his career, Bob Rae crossed over to the Liberal Party, which is a fairly common occurrence for politicians in many countries. Yet for some reason, most voters choose political allegiances for life. At the other end of the spectrum, look at Republican George W. Bush becoming the US president. The economy entered the Great Recession under his leadership, partly due to all the excess government spending. Also, during the beginning of his reign, more new immigrants entered the US than over any 5-year period in US history. And he tried to introduce a bill that would allow illegal immigrants to work in the country, eventually working towards citizenship. Although he held strict Republican views on many issues, there were several where he was against his party's traditional views, which always garners some political backlash. Political leaders have to work with the hand that they are dealt, and often in order to do what's best for their population, they have to go against their party's traditional standpoints. What's the harm in that? Nothing, actually. It's wonderful when leaders can adapt to the times or situation and compromise in the best interest of the people. The problem is most people vote with their party, not with their brains. This includes the leaders and the public. How many times has a bill or piece of legislation been voted down simply because the party with the majority didn't draw it up? Or how many times have individuals with no relevant experience or skill being elected because of their party affiliation. I could use many examples of 18 or 19-year-olds being elected into positions of power, obviously lacking education or experience warranting such a position. But instead I have chosen an example that should make any voter shudder in disbelief. Recently, in the Alberta provincial elections, the NDP gained drastically on the incumbent Conservatives as the low oil prices and struggling economy led the population towards a desire for change. The NDP easily won a majority, even though most of their candidates had no political experience. However, the one that took the cake was Deborah Drever, a 26-year-old living with her grandmother who described pizza making in great detail as the only experience on her resume, handily won her Calgary riding over an 18-year-old Liberal and a middle-aged Conservative lawyer. Now, common sense on that information alone would say re-electing the Conservatives and the lawyer would probably make sense. But instead, Deborah took office. First, let's take a look at some of her public social media pictures. Posting with a weed t-shirt, not a great start, but that can be overlooked. Giving the middle finger to the Canadian flag, a bit more offensive and inappropriate for an elected Canadian member of provincial parliament. As part of an album cover, laying on the ground with her legs spread, surrounded by bikers, one of whom has a bottle and is clearly going to do something explicit. This crosses a line an elected official shouldn't be crossing. Finally, after the election, posting this picture on Instagram, showing two Conservative cabinet members, mocking them as being homosexual, was pathetically childish. Wait, no, that's unfair to children. I don't really know the words to describe this abomination. This was the last straw for the NDP Premier of Alberta, who immediately kicked her out of the NDP party. She still represents her riding, just as an independent. Why are educated populations allowing themselves to be represented by unqualified, inexperienced, immature people? It baffles me. Most democratic systems are based on the Greek and Roman systems, which were tiered governments where individuals had to work their way up the political ladder, and although there were still more traditional versus more progressive cliques of individuals, there were no official political allegiances, so individuals could vote with their minds on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to always following their party's leader. I find the Roman system in particular interesting because two consuls were elected as their leaders, a senior and a junior, but they shared duties on alternating months, while maintaining a veto power over each other's decisions. They also had to answer to the Senate, which is where they returned after a one-year reign. Individuals had to pay their political dues before moving through each political tier, and some who were not cut out to rise farther were held by their peers at the appropriate political levels. So in general, leaders were always well prepared for the positions of power. Even in times of crisis, when an absolute dictator was required to act quickly, bypassing all of the typical legal and political red tape, at least they could make sure they were only granting such power to appropriate individuals, and then it would be taken back immediately after the crisis was abated. Now their system, like all systems, was not without flaws or negative experiences. However, it did successfully last for hundreds of years, ruling over most of Europe as well as into Africa and Asia, millennia ahead of most other political systems at the time. Today, we still have constant political unrest in the Middle East, Africa, and much of Europe. In the past, leader of your country or civilization was the greatest honor, and only the elite could rise to this level, at which time they generally cherished their time in power, trying to leave a lasting positive legacy. Today, there is much more money, reverence, and prestige to be gained elsewhere, and often political leaders reach this point because of wealth, family background, smear campaigns against other parties, or unfortunately in some cases, military influence. We try to elect the best possible person to represent us as a population, to make decisions for us because we don't have the understanding or time to assess each decision appropriately. Yet we don't trust our leaders, and they often don't even trust themselves, resorting to referendums so they can free themselves of the necessity to make difficult decisions and avoid being blamed for the consequences of their actions. Referendums are often pointless because the population does not know the issue and the repercussions of the alternatives well enough to make the same informed decision as a leader whose job it is to know the ins and outs in great detail and to weigh the greater good of the entire population. See the recent Greek referendum. Even elections themselves are often futile because we don't really know the candidates well enough prior to the election, or we don't have enough options. Sometimes insiders are the ones best equipped to choose our leaders. Maybe politicians should choose candidates from the appropriate rung of the political ladder so that we get the best candidates according to their peers. Kind of like the papacy. Would you really want all us average Joes electing the next pope? No, we trust the bishops are much better informed to make these decisions. When we have political allegiances and mass votes, we often get candidates who are not the best for the job. No way you can tell me, in a brilliant country such as the US, with over 300 million people, this was the best option as your leader.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again."
Like many politicians, George W. seems like a nice, charismatic guy, pretty funny, and probably a lot of fun to be around. But not even in ancient Roman times, with all the wealth and family ties in the world, would someone like this be deemed worthy of the highest office in the land. Sadly, it's not like there were a lot of other great options. So what's the solution? Almost everything in society has educational and experiential requirements. Yet many elected offices have none. Granted, it's not very likely anyone is going to rise to the leader of a democratic country overnight without some necessary background, experience, and skills, but a lot of people make their way onto the rungs of the political ladder with ease just because they adhere to a political party and sometimes are the only such willing candidate. Then from there, they often rise much farther and quicker than they should. Many electoral offices involve no political parties, and perhaps this is the best alternative. Candidates can be judged based purely on their own qualities and not viewed through the lens of a particular political party, and then they will be free to make decisions without concern for strain from their party's static stances. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch some of my other videos as well. Have a great day.